We doubled down and we made double house payments because we were both still working. And we said, here's the deal. If you're going to stay home and we're going to have children, we have to be debt free. That was my next great big goal. But by this time, he wasn't calling me insane anymore. He was on board. And we made double house payments and paid off a 15-year mortgage in 5 years.
In all of the good times and even the trials, through tears and through laughter, yeah, I know that I'll smile when I think of you. Smile for the things you do. Smile, God gave me you. You are the reason I smile. Yeah.
This is Behind Our Smiles.
Pursuing connection.
And finding joy.
Even in the struggle.
And welcome back to another episode of the Behind Our Smiles podcast. We are Joe and Tara Buchanan. And Tara, we are so excited today.
Today's a special day.
Yes.
Because we have guests in the studio with us, Larry and Hope Ware, and they are from Under the Median on YouTube.
How are you guys doing today?
Well, we're doing great, and we're so glad to be here today.
Well, the cool thing about Larry and Hope is they do their YouTube channel, and they talk a lot about frugality and helping families stay out of debt. But they also have a lot to share about marriage and making a strong marriage. For how many years have you been married?
35.
35 years. So there's going to be a lot of years to cover.
So yeah, thank you guys for joining us today. We're really glad that you're here. Tell us a little bit of the story of how you guys came to know each other.
Give us a year for reference point, so we know how far back we're going.
Well, we can even go back to the month and the year. We actually met studying broadcasting at Illinois Central College back in 1982, about 41 years ago.
Well, it goes back a little before that, though, because in the first class, the teacher asked us to just basically stand up, turn around, introduce ourselves to the rest of the class. And so he was 2 rows in front of me, stood up, turned around, said, I'm Larry Ware. And the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, that man is going to be very important in your life. And a split second later, I thought, I'm going to marry him. So when we met in October, I gave him my number. I said, here's my number, use it.
Okay, so right away, there's something special about him, but you didn't know what it was. Did you notice anything special about Hope that day?
I didn't. I do remember looking at her. I can remember exactly where she was sitting in the classroom during the very first day.
And for reference point as well, she was a very young student, just out of high school, and you were...
I was 25.
You were a little older.
So I'd been out of high school for 7 years.
Did you know that right away, Hope?
I knew he was older, but he told me later, he said, I was in the car on my way home and he said, Lord, she seems like a really nice kid. And kid was not the vibe I was going for.
We get it.
Yeah. So I think like that 7-year age difference was profound at that time. And he was, I think, in a very different place in his life. He was a returning student. He had started college and he was going to study electrical engineering.
Yes.
And got to the math part and went, nope, not for me.
It wasn't a fit.
Yeah, so he had stayed out and worked full time for a number of years, and then he was coming back again, and here I was just fresh out of high school.
What's kind of interesting about the day that we met, I had my broadcast textbook in my hand, and inside I had last day's newsletter that happened to be Keith Green Memorial Tribute newsletter. That fell out of my textbook onto the floor face up, so it had a picture of Keith Green on it. And Hope looked at it and she goes, "That's Keith Green. Are you a Christian?" And so that's what set the stage, kind of the tone of our relationship. Right away, we established that she was a Christian and so was I.
So you kind of looked at her as a nice kid.
Yes.
How did that transition into actual dating?
Slowly, very slowly. She became just a good friend. We would go out after class. We'd go out to Hardee's and go out to eat. We would spend a lot of time together talking. One of the things I liked about Hope is that she was just so easy to talk to. The conversation was just very fluid. She was very open. And I thought she was just a very delightful person. But it would be like talking to your little sister. I never thought we would date or get married. I guess it took from October of 82 to about May of 1983, about 7 months before I finally asked her if she'd like to go on a little trip up to Starved Rock. And that was a transitional trip. That's where it transitioned from friends to something a little more serious. And then we started dating officially in June. So about a month later, we were dating.
What's interesting, though, is that my mother met him along the way. He was taking me out for lunch a couple of times a week. And, of course, he was paying, and I was a poor college student. So I was like, well, yeah, I'm going to lunch. You're paying. I'm in. And she told me after she met him, she said, you should date him. And I'm like, I don't know, because by that point, I'd kind of gotten the vibe that this was a friend zone thing. He wasn't really interested. I'm like, Mom, I don't think he's super interested in me. And she said, here's what I'm noticing about him. He makes you laugh. Wow. And she said, I'm telling you, in a marriage, you have to remember to laugh sometimes. There are times they're like, it gets hard. And you're like, you have to have somebody who's going to say, we're going to laugh together and we're going to get through this. And she said, that's why I think you should date him. But she, unbeknownst to me, had written down on pieces of paper exactly what she wanted in a marriage partner for each of her children. Wow. And then she prayed over the list and she stuck it in her Bible, and she did not give us those pieces of paper until our wedding day. Wow. And so what was on my piece of paper years later was, I want Hope to marry Larry Ware or someone just like him.
Wow.
Very specific. I'm glad you're Larry Ware, not someone just like
Yes.
him.
Yeah, I am too.
Well, I think I got the best end of the bargain.
So you both have noticed each other, but which of you made the first move?
I'll let Hope answer
Oh,
that.
that is easy. I so made the first move.
Okay, that's
because
good.
remember, I was the one that knew he was going to marry me, even though he
that's
had
right.
not a clue he was going to marry me. So, yeah, I definitely made the first move.
And what did that look like?
Well, after I gave him my phone number,
Okay.
we hung out together as friends, and I was chill with that. I was cool. I was not pushing anything. And then we decided one day we would go to Starved Rock for the day. I was like, well, this seems like more of a commitment, because that's 2 hours each direction in the car. So that seems like that's going to be some good time to get to know one another, which it was. It was great. We talked. We never stopped talking. But so when I did a Starved Rock, this is a true story, which I do not generally tell. I decided that I would be the quintessential weak female, and so whenever we got to a step of any distance at all, I'd say, I'm not sure I can make that step. Can you just help me down?
This ledge is kind of steep. Hold my hand.
And so he was thinking, what is wrong with this woman that she can't even hike decently? And I was like, well, he gets to hold my hand every time I go up or down a step.
I could see behind that.
You saw through that pretty
I
quick.
did.
Yeah, he did. We had meaningful conversations, and he explained to me why he never wanted to get married.
That's
That sounds really romantic.
Yes. He was questioning, I think, what my intentions were. I know that sounds weird, because usually it's you question what the guy's intentions are. He was questioning what my intentions were toward him, and whether he really wanted to be involved with a woman who couldn't hike.
True.
And Hope let her, I could tell that she liked me. So I never had to question how Hope felt about me. The neat thing about that walk, it was a pivotal change point in our relationship, that we could just talk so freely, and the conversation never seemed to end. We just went from one thing to the next. And the things that I found out was that our backgrounds were so similar. Her mom and my dad grew up in the same hometown. She grew up in a hometown that my mom lived in. She's one of four. I'm one of four. There's just so many things. Her dad worked in a factory environment. My dad did too. So I thought, well, this would really lessen a lot of the adjustment period, since we were both kind of from the same economic, social background. But a very interesting event happened on that trip when we were hiking up near the lodge, and a little chipmunk ran out in front of Hope, and she was just in the process of putting her foot down, and she stepped on it.
I did. I killed a
Wow.
chipmunk.
That was a great first.
And
date.
and so he looked down, and I'm like, what's wrong with it? And it was it was clearly dying. And he's like, I think you stepped on it. And then all these people came around. They're like, what happened? Oh, this woman stepped on a chipmunk. And remember, because I'm the one who's going, and having him hold my hand every 2 seconds. And so he wasn't sure where to go at that moment. So he's just gently patting my back it'll be okay. And he's trying to pat my back kind of from a distance. So he's not really
What is the
embracing
appropriate
me.
response when the girl you're with kills a chipmunk?
It was the world's most awkward moment.
I felt so bad for her. That was a terrible thing. But then we had a reversal later on. After the drive home, we decided to go from her house to Hardy's. And she lives up a real steep hill from Hardy's. And I was driving a little old Chevette 4-speed. And I said, you can turn this whole car off and run it. And then I can just pop the clutch and start it up. It's so cool. So I shut it off and coasted down the hill. And I got to the bottom, and it's pouring rain, storming, pouring rain. I mean, just gushing rain. And the car wouldn't start.
Oh, no.
It wouldn't start. I looked at Hope and I said, do you know how to drive a stick shift? And she goes, no. I go, well, you got to get out and push. It was awful.
And I looked at him and said, are you serious? He goes, no, really, the car's not going to go unless it's in motion. And then when it's in motion, I can pop the clutch and I can get it going. I'm like, okay,
Well, for a girl who
why
couldn't
not?
hike.
I know. So suddenly I got brave. I was like, this is time to get braver. And I got out and I pushed the car and he got it started. But that was pivotal for him because he said, you know what? Any woman who isn't going to worry about her hair, isn't going to worry about her makeup, isn't going to worry about any of that stuff, is going to get out and push my car. I think I want to spend some more time with her.
She was in like Flynn
Yeah.
after that. So I feel like we had to pass 2 tests there on our first date. and the car went and we made it to Hardee's. So it all came out okay.
So then how soon did things start to get serious?
Probably
1 month later,
Yeah,
we
it was.
officially started
Yeah, it
dating
was-
in June of 1983. June of 83.
So that's when we kind of, after that date, which I still call our first date, and 40 years later, he still refuses to call our first date.
I call it an outing.
He calls it an outing still. That was when we kind of began to get down to having those conversations, those face-to-face conversations. We say, you know what is this? What are we? Are we friends? Are we not friends? Are we moving forward? Are we not? Because at some point, you have to, as a couple, make that decision whether this relationship is going anywhere or not. And so it took us a few not dates to figure out whether we wanted to move forward. And a month later, he was like, you know what? I think we have enough in common. I feel like we've got a good base of friendship. Let's go forward and see where this leads.
And it
Now, were
wasn't-
you more confident than that? He's saying, I think this is okay. I think we're
Yeah,
moving
no, I was
forward."
more confident than that.
Oh, yeah, she was always 2 steps ahead of me.
Always.
All the way
I
through,
still
all the
am.
way
40
through.
years later, I'm still
Pretty
2
much,
steps ahead
pretty
of him.
much. Yeah, but Hope and I did know each other pretty well because we were friends for 7 months before that May 23rd date
Outing.
at Starved Rock, the outing.
He called it a date.
Well, it's kind of a date. You know what? In all,
This is a breakthrough moment.
And this is an official recording. So, no.
a funny story about the date, I took my camera and took a whole roll of film pictures of us. And I showed them to one of my cell groups at the church. So here I was already showing her off. So I liked Hope. I liked her a lot. She was a very, very nice person, very fun to be with.
Now, in that time you were getting to know each other, you mentioned you had a lot of similarities in your backgrounds and how you were raised. What were the differences that you saw right away?
Yeah. Well,
I'd say
one
there's
of the
a
definite
few.
differences was that I am always like out there. I was the girl who grabbed my hairbrush and sang in front of the mirror at home because I've always loved being that person who was up on stage, who was in front of people, who was presenting, who was performing, and he was the total opposite. He was like, let me sit in the back of the church
And run sound.
and he ran the sound system and his church. He invited me to visit his church shortly after we started dating.
I knew 3 people.
And 500 people in the church, he knew 3 people. and my kids still joke years later that, like, if they take me anywhere, like, Mom works the room.
yeah.
I want to get to know everybody in the room. And
Hope is a quintessential extrovert.
and he's really at heart kind of a melancholic introvert.
Very definitely. Yeah.
And so that was an adjustment because even after we first got married, I would like involve him in stuff without his knowledge.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. I would volunteer him. Well, as a couple, I would volunteer both of us, and then I would inform him later.
That we
by
were
the way,
producing, writing, and directing the Christmas play at church. I went, oh, are we really? Oh, okay.
well, clearly he needed to get out of his sound corner, and I thought that was like the best way to do it without his permission or knowledge ahead of time. And so I had to learn really quickly that it wasn't so much that he didn't want to do things with me, but he kind of wanted to have a voice in decisions.
Absolutely. So back to 1983.
Oh,
so
yes.
things are getting serious, and they get serious enough that you pop the question, right?
was a year-
That's an interesting story because we were engaged twice.
For the first time.
So the first time we dated for a year and a quarter and then broke up. So it was, I don't remember exactly when I remember where we were. We were at Starved Rock
And that was almost exactly a year after our first date.
think
So
that
we went
was
back
a
to
year,
the
yeah.
site of our first date.
That's right.
And
that's right.
interestingly, fast forward 30, I think it was on our 30th anniversary, we went back to that exact same location and we took all 4 of our kids with us. And he bent the knee again 30 years later and asked me to marry him at French Canyon, but there were a bunch of other people there, and they were like going, oh, and they're clapping because they think that he just proposed to me. And we're like, no, this is like the second time through. This is our 30th anniversary. These are all of our children. But it was fun because so we took pictures of him like reenacting it 30 years later, surrounded by our children.
Now, were there any chipmunks involved? When you,
No.
No chipmunks that time.
So you had been dating 1 year. You get engaged.
Yes.
You're feeling pretty confident at that place. But as you said just a few minutes ago, you were actually engaged twice. So I'm guessing things didn't go so well in the first engagement.
No, we had some family pressures and some things were going on that I wasn't used to. I wasn't raised in conflict. I was raised in a pretty harmonious home. And I wasn't used to it. I didn't really know how to deal with it. And I found myself just being very concerned that that might enter into our marriage and cause problems that maybe I wouldn't know how to deal with.
So how'd that affect you, Hope? So he made the call to say, I'm not.
I did it, yeah.
And how did that affect
Yeah,
you?
did you see that coming? Were you blindsided by it?
I was a little blindsided because I think in my mind, and I think truthfully, looking 35 years in the future as I am now, maybe we should have sought out a neutral third party.
Yes.
And I think what's so interesting to me is 35, 40 years ago, really this whole idea of seeking out a counselor. I think even before you're married, to say, hey, we have all these external pressures. We're not sure how to deal with them as a couple. Can you help us navigate some boundaries and things like that? That didn't necessarily even occur to us. I think it was that fight or flight mechanism that said, we're experiencing this. And I was with the, well, let's fight this through. And he was the, let's flight. And he was ready to call it. And so I was disappointed in him. I was devastated. He was my best friend. But you know, what's interesting is my mother gave me probably the best piece of advice that she has ever, I think, given, because remember, I mean, she knew we were going to get married. And she said, here's the thing. She said, I know your heart's broken. And I know that he has disappointed you and he's made a move that clearly you're not in agreement with. She said, my best advice to you is don't burn your bridges. Because you can react to him in anger and you can tell him off. You can do that. You can throw a shoe at him. You can, but it's not really going to help you ultimately. It's not going to make you feel any better about what's happened. And it's certainly not going to make him feel any better about it. But if you allow him to go, God may change the circumstances down the line and bring you back together again. But if you burn the bridge now, it's not going to happen. Don't do it.
And frankly, in the 3 years we were broke up, God did so many good things in Hope's life and in my life to make the return so much better and richer. So we were stronger when we did come back.
So when you were apart those 3 years, were you in contact at all? Was it completely...
The radio silence?
Yeah.
Well, Hope called me about a year later, and she had all these broadcast magazines from class that she wanted to give me, and I knew that was an excuse just to call me. That
Just
was
like
okay.
the hiking,
But you
right?
made it a year, which is
About a year.
incredible.
Yeah, and he's absolutely right. Like calling him a year later was a total ploy on my part. A very blatant, open one. Hey, I found these magazines. We paid for this subscription together. I hate to throw them out because, you were involved in
Just
this.
trying to be a kind friend.
Exactly. How you doing?
So then what tipped the scales back to
Right, because
making this
another
work,
2 years
right?
passes.
And I appreciated hearing from her, but I did not date anybody in the 3 years that we were broke up. I just wanted God to work in my life and prepare me for being a husband and eventually a father. And I just had free time to do some things I wanted to do. I went out backpacking out in the mountains. I was involved in my church, and I had good friends there, and I was kind of enjoying life. And Hope had moved out. She'd moved in with 2 really nice Christian gals, great influences, went to another really good church. We both left the church that we were attending and went to different churches. But she surrounded herself with good people, got involved in a music ministry, She was working on the worship team at her church. I was so impressed with her. She got a job at a local radio station, and I just thought, she's just making so many good choices. It gave me a lot of confidence that she was going to be the person that I probably would eventually want to marry again,
Now, did you date anyone in that time, Hope?
Oh, I so did.
Okay.
Yeah, I think a couple of people. I didn't date a lot, but there were a couple of people in there that I dated. One of the things that I think I learned in that 3 years was it was okay, like if someone asked me out, to say no, thank you. And I think I'm such a perpetual outgoing person. I'm like, oh, they took the time to ask me out. I should go out with them. And I kind of started to figure out what it was I really wanted and what I didn't want. And that was hugely important for me. That was a growth step for me emotionally, to say, wait a minute, it's okay to say no thank you to someone. Boundaries were huge for me because I am such a I trust everybody implicitly, and I want to connect with everybody. And so to be able to say, to have that discernment to say, no, I don't think so. Thank you for asking, but no, thank you. So yeah, there were a few of those in there too.
Did you know that he hadn't dated anyone? Had that thought?
I didn't. I kind of let him go do his own thing. He would call me like once a year. It was really random. About once a year, he'd call me and say, "Hey, how you doing?" I'm like, "Fine."
I went over to her house after a vacation I took out in Colorado. I had climbed the highest mountain out there, and I took the slides over and showed them to you. And so we spent an afternoon together there, and then that was it. We were done.
Yeah, for another year. It was like this weird friendship moment. And I always appreciated him. He had great integrity, very funny, great sense of humor, kept me laughing all the time. So it wasn't that I disliked him. It was that I was not willing at that point to reopen the door unless the door was leading to marriage. Because we'd been down that road once before. And I'm like, if we're going down the road, we're going down it to the end, and we're not playing this weird back and forth game.
But you were still open to that, going toward marriage.
So how did you make the jump then?
Yeah.
I mean, spoiler alert, we kind of know what happens, but.
Well, yeah. The reason why I didn't date for 3 years is that I saw couples in our church dating and then breaking up and then dating somebody else and then breaking up and then dating a third person and breaking up. And I told God, I said, Lord, I just want to wait on you, and I want to wait until you bring me my wife. And I just don't want anybody in between. And I would spend time praying for my wife, who I didn't know who it was. I would just pray for her. I would pray for God's protection and direction, and that he would just guide and lead that person and prepare whatever he needed to do to get us ready. The last thing I wanted was a failure in marriage. I'd seen it in some of my friends and a little bit in our family, not a lot in our family, but I just didn't want that. I absolutely wanted to avoid that.
So what was the turning point for you?
Well, the turning point was a trip I took out west up into the Sangre de Cristo mountain range. I went backpacking, and I was by myself. It was a solo trip. And I got up to the top of this place called the Lake of the Clouds. It was absolutely gorgeous. It was a paradise. Wildflowers everywhere, mountain streams and lakes, just beautiful. There was 2 couples up there, and they were across the lake from where I camped. And at night, I could hear the crackling of the fire, and I could hear them laughing, and they were playing cards and enjoying each other's company. And here I was alone in my tent with my little candle light going, and I was reading a Shakespeare book, and I thought, this is the last time I'm doing this alone. And I said, Lord, you know who I'm going to marry. And this thought came to me, you know who she is. And Hope came to mind. I thought of some other girls I knew and eliminated them.
I guess there was a little list.
Yeah, but Hope came to mind. When I got back from that trip, I contacted Hope about a month later.
He actually called me and he said, "Hi, this is Larry Ware." And I said, "Hi." And he said, "Are you still single?" I was like, that's a leading question.
He's
there.
Right to the point. So how long from that reconnection to marriage? Was that a simpler and more smooth process?
Well, it kind of was. He asked me out to dinner and he asked me for a hug goodnight. And I was tough on him. I said, so can you explain to me like the nature of this hug, why you want this hug, what this hug means? And he's like, oh my heavens, it was
really
just a hug.
dissected it.
And I'm like, and I said, look, here's the deal. We've known each other a long time, and we've been down this road almost leading to marriage once. And I said, I think you're a great guy. I really, really do. I admire you. I respect you. I think that we could have a future, but I am not willing to open this door unless it's going to go somewhere. So you need to figure that out before you start expressing, public displays of affection or any display of affection. You need to know that. And so, it sounds horrible, like I forced him into making a decision, right off the bat. But I also knew that with Larry, he needs to be able to make that decision. And then once he's made the decision, he'll stick to it. But, and it wasn't that I wanted an answer that night, but I wanted him to know I'm in this to win it and you need to be in it with me.
So that would have been September of 1987. I also asked her over to my house. I made her supper and we watched a movie on our VCR. And we were kind of connecting a little better that night. And then I don't know, it just didn't feel right at that time. But by Thanksgiving, by November of 87, then I contacted her. We got back together, and I knew it was right at that point. And then I told her that I would like to date her again.
So how long from September when you started dating in 87 till you asked her to marry you?
January of 88.
Okay, so
It
pretty
didn't take
quick.
too long.
There were well-meaning women in my church that were quite concerned for me because here's this guy, they've never seen him, I've not brought him to church, and all of a sudden I'm like, hey, this is my fiancé, we're getting married. And they're like, honey? And like these older women are setting me down going, let's talk about this for me. I said, no, I've known him 5.5 years. This is the whole backstory that you don't know. And they're like, oh, never mind.
So how long did it take for you, Hope, to have that trust rebuilt, to feel comfortable entertaining, number one, the idea of marriage, but also moving toward marriage?
It was a series of faith-building exercises where we had to have those moments, because when you first get back together and you're like euphoric, you're like, everything's wonderful. We're never going to have a disagreement. This is amazing. And then you hit a few roadblocks where you're like, oh, this is not going to be so easy. And I think those moments where he sat with me face to face and worked through the issues. Because remember,
Instead of running away. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, we broke up the first time because part of it was because we were too young and immature to figure out how to navigate boundaries and navigate, difficulties and disagreements. And so for me, it was that I'm going to see how he deals like under pressure. And when he stuck with it until we'd worked it through to the point where both of us felt like we'd been heard and we didn't necessarily agree, but we understood where the other one was coming from, that's when I went, okay, this is going to work.
And it was different from what your previous pattern had been.
Yeah,
There's
because
a change.
Yeah, previously it was like stick your head in the sand, pretend that this whole disagreement does not exist, and just move on. And it was a duck and cover all the time. It was like part of the reason we didn't have a lot of disagreements the first time through is because we were unwilling to acknowledge them with each other. I think for fear that one or the other was going to walk away. But you can't do that in a marriage. You got to figure out how to stay in the trenches until you work it through.
And I think the 3 years apart gave us both some time to mature and kind of grow up and understand what it was really going to take to make this relationship work. And I felt very comfortable with her by January. And my dad had taken her out to buy a car. She was replacing an old Ford Granada that was on its last leg, and I loaned her, actually I gave her $100 toward a 1981 Chevy Citation. And I was kind of joking when I said this to her, but I said, well, I've got some investment in you now. So I felt like I needed to get this commitment done. So that's when I proposed. I actually proposed that night to her.
And I think your marriage outlasted the car.
Very
It
much
did.
so.
Oh, yeah.
So you're
Easily.
good to go.
So was that a good $100 investment?
Yeah, I know. And our kids all know that story, of course, though. So they're like, yep, Dad got his $100 back out of Mom. It's all good.
So looking at your early years of your marriage, you can answer either these questions first. Are the best parts of your early newlywed years or the worst parts?
I have a hard time
First few
even
years.
remembering any worst part.
I understand that too, yes, when it's been a lot of years, but best you can to
No,
1990.
I mean, I thought our first year was pretty good for a first year. one of the things that we did is we decided to put away anything that would pull us apart. So she was involved with a music ministry. I did a lot of long-distance bike riding. I spent a lot of time with friends. We decided to table a lot of that so we could just get to know each other and spend time with each other and find some things that we like to do together that would draw us together and strengthen that marriage bond. So that was the first thing that we did for that first year. Hope's got a different idea.
Yeah, I was wondering if you agree,
awesome,
Hope. Was
that's
the
so
first
intentional,
year
yeah.
bliss? Was it amazing?
Okay, I so much appreciate, Larry, you sharing the good parts now. I'm going to share the hard parts.
See, so you guys are good together.
It's typically in our relationship, too. I remember the good parts.
That wasn't that good.
So there were a couple, I think, of serious issues that we had to deal with. So one of those issues was figuring out how to be together as a couple and yet maintain autonomy.
Yes, right.
Because I am not an extension of my husband and he's not an extension of me. And figuring out how to be who we are without feeling like the other one needs to constantly like tag along.
Yeah, fold into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was big. I think the other issue that we faced was we had both dated other people, and he had had one long-term relationship in high school.
High school. All through high school, one person.
So when he was praying for his ideal woman, he was praying almost for like another version of his high school sweetheart.
Yeah. What was that? Who was that person like then, Larry?
Well,
What are you imagining?
Actually, what I ended up doing is I wrote down on a piece of paper the characteristics that I wanted in a wife, and I guess they were kind of similar to the girl I dated in high school. But I wanted
shaking her head.
I wanted a tall, slender gal, long, straight hair, who liked to ride bikes and liked to do a lot of outdoor activities, camping, backpacking, those kind of things. Very quiet, meek, mild nature, just real even keeled.
Sit in the background.
Soft, quiet, that I could just spend time with, and we could just sit by the open fire and roast marshmallows for the rest of our lives. And Hope is basically none of those things. And what's so
Her hair
funny?
got pretty long. That's why she
I would
had long hair, right?
I would describe Hope as a force of nature, and so quiet does not describe her. But you know what? It's really interesting how God puts people together because he knows what we need. And what I needed in Hope was somebody that would complement my strengths and weaknesses. So where my strengths and weaknesses lie, hers are almost the opposite. So she fills in those gaps. And that's what makes our marriage bond so good.
That's really amazing.
And so I think in a marriage situation, it's figuring out how you fit together and figuring out that being opposite is not bad and that your spouse doesn't have to be you. I mean, I figured out that I could come up with all the great plans in the world, but really Larry wanted to be apprised of them before I involved him.
Right.
And I figured out pretty quickly he is an incredible detail-oriented person. I mean, almost to a fault. He wants every detail figured out. But I learned to like lean on that and say, hey, I got this great idea. Can you like map it all out for me? And then he'd come up with these detailed spreadsheets on like how, what steps I needed to take and the order I needed to take them in and what I needed to think about before I moved to the next step. And I was like, this is great. So you learn to figure out like what your spouse's strengths are and figure out how you can utilize those together to become stronger as a couple.
And Hope is a visionary. She's got this vision for these grand ideas and things I would never even think of attempting. And oftentimes she would come to me with one of these ideas and I would look at her and very lovingly and tenderly tell her that she was insane. And but I would back it up with, but if you can make it work, I'm gonna pull in alongside you and I'll help you get to this goal. And by golly, she'd done that. She is great for a vision of the impossible that I would never attempt.
So one of your strengths as a couple is obviously dealing with your YouTube channel and talking about financial management. And so when it comes to managing your family finances, how are you the same and how are you different?
We're very different.
Because you seem like you're on the same page from the outside.
We're on the same page, but we're very different. I'm a spender and she is a saver. And it was because of her that we found out that we were basically going broke.
No, we were very broke. We weren't going there. We were there.
2 months after we got married, we were basically broke. And we had 2 cars we were paying on. We were paying too much in rent. We had more money going out than was coming in, basically. She came up with a plan on how to budget. And we started out pretty minimal about that at first. And then it gradually evolved into what we're doing now.
I'm guessing you saw success in that, right? You kind of start to put together a budget. You start to map your income and your outgo, and you go, wait a minute, this actually could help us.
Yeah, so I was the one who did all the reading, all the research, all the putting things together. And then I just went to him and told him, I apprised him of what the plan was. And he was clueless that there was even a plan to be had. All he knew was that I'd gone to him and said, hi, we're flat broke. This is a problem, and I'm going to let you know how we're going to fix it. He's like, whatever. He's going on with life. And so 2 months later, I was like, so I got the plan all figured out. Here's what we're going to do. And that was when he said, you are insane. And I realized, God bless Gary Chapman forever and ever and ever for this like love languages thing, because I figured out I'm not speaking this man's love language. He is concrete, sequential. He needs to see it in writing. So I couldn't have these weird plans like around, going around in my head that I understood the plan, but it was all in my head. It was not down on paper, and he had to see it. So once he saw point A is where we're at, point Z is where we want to be, here are the steps we're going to take to get from A to Z, he was like, I'm in. And he got it. But until he saw it in writing, he literally did not understand what in the world. It was like I was talking gibberish to him.
This all came about from her listening to Larry Burkett. And
I remember that name, yeah.
One of the things that he talked about was getting out of debt and paying off car loans. And when you do that, you give yourself a raise, because now all that money going out on the loan, you have at your disposal to put into your budget. And she came home one day from listening to his program, and she told me, we're going to pay cash for our next car. Well, we're both making about $5 an hour. We don't owe a ton of money on our cars, but I'm thinking we've got to kind of pay off the cars we have first. And I just didn't see how we were possibly going to pay cash for our next car. But we got working real hard at paying those cars off. The next car we bought, we took out a year loan, paid it off in 6 months, and then the following cars from then on, we paid cash.
Wow. Because
of her tenacity and her planning.
Now, what about her plan? Just real quick, going back, I think that was a part of it, what you just shared. How do we pay for a car in cash? But what part of her budget plan seemed insane to you?
Well,
budget doesn't sound that insane. I mean,
it would be like saying you're going to pay cash for the Empire State Building to me.
Okay.
I mean, it just seemed like way more money than I could see coming in. Versus what was going out. I thought, we got too much money going out. We got too many bills that we're paying right now. And we'd already gotten out of the expensive apartment. We were now renting a house, much less rent. So we were on track for that. But I just thought, we've got to do a few things first before we get to that. So we started by not going out to eat as much. We started cutting out things that were extra that we were doing. And once we started doing that and pouring that money into the goal, then the goal started to become attainable.
Well, I love that you, Hope, were able to see through this idea that he wasn't getting it.
Yeah.
And how did the financial situation change when you began to plan for a family?
Yeah, I think for us, like we didn't even start trying to have a family until we'd been married for 4 years. And then it was like a complete and utter surprise to us that we could not get pregnant. And we were still running the spreadsheet, in the background and figuring out, we always thought that I would go back to work because on his income, we were like, there is just literally no way that this is going to work. And so we're trying to get pregnant. We saw the doctor. They did all this testing on both of us. And the doctor finally looked at me. He said, I can't find anything wrong with you. I mean, I'm like, as far as something that is keeping you from getting pregnant. And he offered to put me on, I think it's Clomid, one of those things that would help give me a better chance of conceiving. And I finally said, you know what? I feel like this is God's timing. If there's nothing preventing it, we have to give God a chance to allow us to conceive when it's in his time. And at this point, I'm not willing to go down
And you
that
were both
route.
a little bit older, especially Larry.
Yeah, oh,
right?
yeah.
You had married later. So did you feel that?
Yeah, I was almost 31 when we got married. So by the time we were looking at our firstborn, I was 39, almost 40.
So you did
And-
eventually get pregnant, though. You
Yeah.
kind of released that struggle to the Lord and said, whatever
9 years
you
later,
want.
I
she
did.
got pregnant. 9 years after we got married.
Where was
married,
your
yeah.
financial situation at that point?
Not great.
It was not great.
So you're still trying to get there.
But I'm still a visionary. I'm still in it to win it. And one of the things that we had done though, in the meantime, like we were like, okay, so we're waiting to see if God's going to bless us with children, and we're believing that that's going to happen. What can we do to set ourselves up financially for when that does happen? So what we did was we looked all around, and the amount of money we had to put toward a house was just pathetic. It was so sad. And we kept looking and looking and looking and looking. And finally we found a house. It was in an estate. It was a little 2-bedroom bungalow, original 1930. And believe me, everything in that house was from 1930.
The original purchaser was still
owned it.
owned the house. They bought it in 1931, and the husband had passed away, and the widow was selling it.
So it was in an estate, and we offered, I think, 20% down.
We did.
And we were in a 3-way bidding war for this house, and we offered a bigger down payment. And so she accepted our offer. But we bought that house for a song, really inexpensively, knowing that our next goal was to start saving up and fixing it up literally one room at a time.
Yeah.
And so we stayed in that house. When we bought it, we said it was a 10-year house. It wound up being an 18-year house.
We had all 4 boys in that house.
We
2-bedroom
doubled
house.
down, though. So we were waiting to get pregnant, and we doubled down, and we made double house payments because we were both still working. And we said, here's the deal. If you're going to stay home and we're going to have children, we have to be debt free. That was my next great big goal. But by this time, he wasn't calling me insane anymore. He was on board. And we made double house payments for 5 years and paid off a 15-year mortgage in 5 years. And I think our oldest son was 14 months old when we made the
paid it
last
off.
payment.
Here's the interesting thing, too. When Hope came home and she did the pregnancy test and found out she was pregnant with our first, we looked at each other and I said, you're coming home from work. Just instantly. We weren't planning to do that. And I got offered a job right away from a mutual friend of ours. And she said, all you have to do is go down there and you've got the job. And it was quite a bit more a year. It was an annual salary. It was much more than I was making. So God provided. I remember taking the dog out for a walk before this happened. It was the night before that happened. I said, Lord, I know we can make it on my job, but it's going to be very difficult. But if you want to do something, I put it in your hands. And it's funny how I didn't even seek out that job. So that was a real blessing of how God provided.
So Hope, the first baby was a bit of a surprise blessing. Then was the second one a surprise as well?
He was definitely planned.
Okay.
John
Oh, yeah.
was planned.
I mean,
yeah.
but you also knew that your fertility might have been a little bit up and down, or not to know what to expect. Or...
I think James was 17 months old, and we said, okay, like, we're ready for baby number 2. And I think I was pregnant a month later with John. And then after John was born, so 2-bedroom house, 2 boys, we're like, yep, we are set for life. I was 35, he would have been 42, and we're like, we're done. And then fast forward another few years, I was 39, and I really felt the Holy Spirit saying, open yourself up to having more children. I was like, oh, there's no way. I am 39.
I'm
Seriously?
Sarah. I'm 90 years
I
old.
know. I felt that way. I was like, Lord, do you know how old I am? Because I was 39. I thought, I'm going to go to Larry. I'm going to test this. It's like one of those weird fleece things, right? I'm going to test this. Lord, I'm going to go to Larry. And he was, how old would you have been at the time? I was 39, so you would have been 46?
Yeah, 46. Different.
I thought he's going to say no. There's no doubt in my mind this man is going to look at me and say, no, we need to be done. So I went to him and I said, I really feel God, the Holy Spirit telling me to open open our hearts to maybe blessing us with another child. And he goes, okay. I'm like, what? no, wait. Let's have
He
this
didn't call you
conversation
insane.
again.
That
You were
was good,
supposed to say no. The insane thing was supposed to come back up again. Yeah.
Are you insane?
And I thought, oh my gosh, that is God. And so I conceived Daniel, and I gave birth to him 1 week before my 40th birthday.
Wow.
Yeah.
Another boy.
Another boy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you were good.
Yeah. And we thought we were done. We're like, okay, we're good again.
God was on the money with that. We got our blessing.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you're still
My
40.
three,
and
the My Three Sons thing.
Yeah.
I can hear the theme song playing right now.
Yeah. In our old age, we'd been blessed again. We're like, okay, we're done. Well, then I was 41 and a half, and I got pregnant again. Then I lost that baby. And I thought, I will never be able to do this again. I am too old. And then sure enough, I'm 43, and we take a pregnancy test, and it's positive. And I looked at Larry, and I said, this pregnancy test is wrong.
I kind of laughed at
I
her.
am. He's laughing at me. And the hormones are already kicking in. And I'm like, look, I don't care what those double lines say. This is menopause. And he looked at me. He said, okay, because I get very, very sick when I'm pregnant. And he said, I'm estimating you have about 2 more weeks of denial. And in those 2 weeks, I'm going to go out and buy baby equipment because we had given everything
We got rid of
away.
it all.
I mean, who thinks that you're going to conceive at the age of almost 43?
And he was also
He's
not,
almost
he's not hearing the
50.
baby. But
I was 50 by the time number 4 came along. Yeah.
But amazingly, here I was 43. I had a fantastic pregnancy. And I'm in an age where I know so many women who would love to conceive in their 40s and can't. And I thought,
One of the
What are the
things too,
chances?
when Hope was at that moment of denial, we were looking at the pregnancy test. I just looked at her, and it just occurred to me that God doesn't make mistakes with these things. He plans for whoever he wants to be brought into this world. And our last born, Philip and I are buddies. He is my little buddy. We spend so much time together, and I just love that little guy. And I love all of our kids, but I'm so glad we had that 4th child now. It was not a mistake.
Once you came to grips with the fact that you were pregnant,
yeah.
was there any apprehension after losing the child before? Did it take you a little while to kind of lean into that confidence that this could be okay?
It did. I was, I think, well into my 2nd trimester by the time I finally relaxed and thought, okay, I'm going to carry this baby to term. Because you do you have that moment. And, and I think for people who have lost children, I think we still look around the family table and think, someone's missing. There should be another little person here, or now they'd be an adult person. But I think that is harder than a lot of people realize that it is. So yeah, I was a good 4.5 months pregnant before I thought, okay, this is going to be all right.
You're raising 4 kids. You're in a home. You're in a not so great area. It's a smaller home. It's a home that God has blessed you with. You have it paid off. 18 years later, was there an urgency to move? You just kind of felt like
yes.
you needed it. You wanted to move. How did that go?
Well, it's interesting. In the last year that we lived in our old house, one house was broken into, another house. We had events happening in homes all around us.
I like how he calls it an outing and an event, right?
Yeah, they were events.
They're like code words, Larry code words.
Yeah, and I had my finger on the pulse because I worked for the police department at that time, and so I kind of knew what the situation was. The real deal breaker was when somebody was running through our yard, and the kids had just been out in front playing. They had come in. I had gotten home from work, and I'm looking out the front window, and I see this guy running through our yard. And when he ran through the yard, I could just tell he was running from something. And I told Hope, I said, you're going to see police coming next. And sure enough, there was a squad car coming up. We lived on a corner lot, and there was a squad car coming up the other road. And they caught him. They arrested him. And I told Hope, I said, we've got to step it up. we've got to get out of here. I don't want to raise my kids in this environment. So once again, Hope took to the idea of we're going to pay cash for our next house.
And you're still living on one income.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, living on my income. And the next house is going to cost a little more because we're not going to buy the same house that we're in. And so that became the next grand challenge for us.
So the 18 years you moved, but where was it at was it like 5 years previous that you had the incident with the guy running through your yard, or was that 2 years
Along
before you
between-
moved?
2 years.
Okay,
Okay,
2
2
years
It took
of
us
time.
2 years to really get it all together to where we could actually lay down the cash for the next house.
And that was something I'm guessing you were both on the same page with.
Absolutely.
Like, we've got to get out.
No
Yeah,
doubt
he had
about it.
stopped calling me crazy, which was really good.
I don't
Oh,
care
yeah,
how
we were-
insane your plan is. Let's do it.
That's right. He's like, and at this point, he's looking at me going, "You can do this, baby." I'm like, okay. And so I came up with a plan. But what was really, I think this was pivotal, not only in our faith walk, but the faith walk of our kids, because this was huge. So his income at that time was around $40,000 a year. And we figured out we had some money set aside in the bank account to pay eventually for a new house. It's just that we'd stepped up this whole process. So the gap between the value of our first home plus our savings set aside for purchasing a home was $30,000. And so we needed another $30,000 to find a house that we felt like would be appropriate for our family in a nice neighborhood. And we needed that $30,000 additional. And people always ask us, they're like, well, couldn't you have taken a mortgage? Yes, we could have. We could easily have qualified for a mortgage. But for us, it was that just moment where we put our shoulder to the wheel and gritted our teeth and said, you know what? We feel like we want to try this. We want to see if it can be done, if we can do this. So it meant saving $30,000. We gave ourselves 24 months to save it.
And that meant making some really difficult decisions.
Oh, yeah.
We cut every extra expense off that we could. I think we were down to one car. We were for a while. I don't remember if we were down to one car.
No,
when
we had
were
two
We had two
at
at the
that
time.
point, yeah.
So we had 2 cars, but we cut off internet. We never have had cable TV. Anything extra at all. Eating out was absolutely taboo. We just didn't go out to eat during those 2 years. We didn't do anything extra. We didn't take any extended vacations. We pretty much hunkered down and banked money so we could get out of this situation.
Well, we had run the numbers, so we knew that like our tax base was going to go up. We've estimated like a new house in a better neighborhood was going to be 3 times the taxes we were paying in the old neighborhood. And we were pretty close. We estimated that heating and cooling were going to be more. That we were going to spend more on gas because we was farther from work. We tried to write down all of these numbers and sort of extrapolate what is our budget going to look like. And that was one of the reasons we said we really need to pay cash because there wouldn't have been enough money left over to make that house payment.
Right.
And so we had like weekly budget meetings. We involved the boys. They got together. We prayed every single week over our finances. I think for them, that was huge for them to be able to be a part of this and to really kind of, I think raising the boys on one income, which was always consistently underneath the U.S. national median income. To give you an idea, I ran the numbers once. So for the first 20 years of us being parents, that would be basically from 1997 to 2017, our gross income, not our net, our gross income ran about an average of all 20 years averaged together, averaged about $37,000 a year. Wow. And so this was a huge stretch for us. And we would pray and we would speak positive affirmations over the house and over the neighborhood and the protection of angels. And
I walked around the house praying.
Yep. And so every week we had a budget meeting and said, this is where we're at. And so for the boys to watch that goal get closer and closer and closer and closer, that was huge for them.
I know that when you're trying to save that much money, it really is 1,000 small decisions.
Yeah.
In our experience,
You
it's
are
1,000
so
small
right.
decisions. But what would you say, looking back, was that 1 or 2 big shifts that made a lot of impact? Because sometimes you feel like, what's the point of saving $5 here? And I get it. But was there anything you say, man, these 2 changes were the ones that really made the most impact?
Yeah, it was a lot of small ones, but a couple of, I think, pivotal moments. Do you remember the nickels and dimes thing? So Larry asked me to get out the budget. He said, how are we going to do this? Get the budget out. And I looked at him and I said, there's not a lot of fluff on there, buddy. I'm just letting you know. There's not hundreds of dollars sitting in that budget that we don't know about. And he said, you get the budget out. I don't care if we pay for this new house with nickels and dimes. We're going to do it. So,
well, we went through the budget and we combed every expense and every area that we could and said, how can we cut this down by even small amounts? And it really is small amounts, as you said, that add up over time to big amounts when you total it together. And so by cutting out everything we could think of, we lived pretty lean. But you know what we had? We still had fun. We still did fun things during that time. We just did free things. We went for walks and we found out free events in our city that we could attend and take our kids to. So it isn't like we just didn't do anything for 2 years. We lived. But yeah, it's those small nickels and dimes that add up.
Just doing the rough math in my head, $30,000 over 24 months is $1,000 a month that you're trying to pull out of your budget. What I love about your story, and I'm sure there were elements of conflict in there, it's one of the top things that cause conflict in marriage is finances. So I believe your secret is that you're on the same page, but would you want to speak into that, like just practical tools for someone who's listening right now, things that you would share to say, this is how we did that?
Well, anything like this comes with some pain, and it takes a lot of discipline and focus. So it doesn't mean that it's easy to do, because it was hard to do. It meant being very disciplined. And for me, I like I said, I was a spender. So I could rationalize, 35 cents for a candy bar. Now they're like $1.75.
No candy bars.
Yeah. I could rationalize that. I'm at work. I'm working hard. I'm making the money. I can go buy a candy bar. No, you can't. I had to start saying no to myself. And it hurt. It hurt to hold back. And so that's what you gotta get creative.
Yeah.
And so that's what it took.
How did it feel at the end of the 24 months?
Oh my gosh. The day that we signed on that house, it was awesome. The bank got robbed that day.
It really did. That's a true story. It was
bank
so
got
weird.
robbed. We were getting ready.
I thought you were being metaphorical.
No, it did.
You don't usually hear that in a sentence. The bank got robbed, and it was so funny.
Yeah. Not for them.
Right.
Yeah. But it was a very interesting event. No, it was like climbing a mountain.
Well, Larry, just to take you back to your first part of your story, you're at the top of that mountain, but this time you aren't alone.
Yeah.
And you can look at your beautiful wife and go, we did this together, obviously with God's help and provision, like reading a goal together versus being by yourself doing it.
Exactly. And when you get to the top of the mountain, you forget about how cold you are, how tired you are, how sore the muscles are. And you look at the view and you spend some time and you just enjoy the view. And that's what it was. And our new neighborhood is so much different than our old neighborhood. And I remember walking there and I was in tears. And I felt like I had died and gone to heaven, that God had blessed us that much from where we were.
In a short time.
And it made all the sacrifice and the hard work so worth it. And I think it's like that in our Christian walk. As we reach those plateaus and pinnacles, we look back and, wow, it was worth it.
And that was the last challenge you ever had, right?
So one of the things, if we could scoot back really quickly to just what we would tell people about big goals, because a couple of things that I think they have to know is it can never be about deprivation. It can't be about what you're giving up. It has to be about what you're gaining. And really keeping that spirit of joy, that's huge.
So Hope, you mentioned earlier that your salary was under the median of the average family. And I know that's the name of your channel. So how did this experience somehow catapult you to where you are now, where you are talking to hundreds of thousands of people each week about frugality and debt?
As our kids grew up and started leaving home, I told Larry, I said, I feel like we need something where we're giving back, where we are speaking into the lives of people and helping them understand that they can live frugally, but they can still have a spirit of joy and abundance even in that journey. And so I had started a blog and it wasn't getting any traction. Then all of a sudden YouTube was thrust in front of us. And I said, we're supposed to do YouTube. I'm just telling you, honey, we're supposed to do YouTube.
And you're like, I'm not afraid of a camera.
I'm not, yeah, I like microphones, I like cameras. And I said, I want you to come on with me, this poor guy who is really comfortable in the
Behind the
background.
camera, right?
Well, actually, by that time, I've done some public things. By this time, I'm not quite as shy about that.
Because I volunteered him, but it's all good.
Yeah. I remember offering to be on the first program with you, and I thought, I'll just come on, say, hi, this is on the other half of our marriage, goodbye.
And people loved him. They loved that sort of seeing both of us together. And so we did an audience poll. I said, how many people want Larry to come back on and be with me? And they were all like, yes. And I said, they want you, honey. But really,
People have spoken.
Yeah.
I think it's nice because they get to see the juxtaposition between like our personalities
Some of the dynamics.
and how we deal with things and, how we reach goals and things like that. So I think really in the whole equation of reaching great big financial goals, working together as a team, I cannot understate it. That's one of the reasons we were able to do it is we had each other's backs. And we had a standard rule that said only one of us gets to lose it at a time. And so when one of us would get discouraged and say, we're never going to do this, then the other one, it was their responsibility to say, no, we are going to reach this. But we couldn't both lose it at the same time. Only one of us. So literally that was a rule. He's like, you've had your chance. This is your opportunity. You're done.
So with doing the YouTube channel, and you guys are at a very high level now, this is like a heavy investment of your time. How has that challenged your marriage? Because I know even for Joe and I, even if you've been married for a while and you have a good relationship and things are, it can still be challenging. I'm just going to guess.
Well, one of the things, speaking from my perspective, I retired in December of this year. So I've been retired for just a little over 6 months. And I pictured retirement as kind of coming alongside and helping Hope, continuing to work with the technical side of the channel and coming on. And she writes the scripts and does most of the producing. And I just come along and we kind of decide on how we're going to present it. And then I'm out and I get on my bike and I go for bike rides. And I plan things that I want to do. And I have a lot of free time and I can read books and call my friends. And that's not the way it's been. She wants me to sit down and help her script, and I'm not real good with that. That's her forte, really, not mine. And I found that it was taking almost all of my free time, and I was getting very little time for myself. And we finally had to have a little talk. It's like, hey, wait a minute. I can't spend all my time sitting next to you while you're doing 90% of the scripting, and I'm just kind of sitting here twiddling my thumbs when I have a garage to clean out and I have things to do. And so we had to work through that. It did cause some friction in our relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Hope your side of the
definitely.
story?
Yeah, it's been an adjustment. It absolutely has been an adjustment. And this all harkens back to figuring out what each of you is good at and leaning into that. And I realized, wait a minute, this is silly. The man doesn't want a script. He's not real gifted at figuring out how to script this, but I am. But what is he really good at? Detail-oriented work. I'm like, you know what? I got like 1,000 photos, which are completely and utterly disorganized. They're not organized in any fashion. Can I give you all of this stuff that needs to be organized? And would you put that in some semblance of order for me? He was like, oh, yeah, let me get my hands on that. It spoke to him. And so we figured out what each of us can do and then where we come back together again to work on stuff for the channel, but where we also work separate.
That's fantastic. It's like that, trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. And that helps you flourish much faster.
Yes.
And move much quicker. How can people find the YouTube channel if they want, or can they find you online, your blog?
Okay,
And what
so
kind of resources do you offer? Yeah.
Okay, so you can find us at underthemedian.com. We named the business Under the Median in honor of the fact that we raised the four boys debt-free on an income which was consistently under the U.S. national median income. So underthemedian.com. And then on YouTube, we'd love to have you come hang out with us on YouTube. And you can find us there on Under the Median.
Yeah, we do two videos a week. Mondays and Thursdays, we launch them as premieres. So we get on with people and we correspond with them while it's running.
And then we'll put that in the show notes, of course, too.
Yes, absolutely.
Before we go, we do have a very important question for you. And I'm going to start with Larry. Larry, what about Hope makes you smile?
Oh my gosh. When she just walks into a room, I smile. I'll tell her, and the kids will be there, we'll be watching TV, and she'll come down from upstairs and walk in, and I go, Guys, the room just got bright. We can shut off a couple lights. I mean, this is awesome. I just love Hope. She brings me so much joy, and her exuberance, her unabashed exuberance for life is just contagious. And the best thing I ever did was marry her.
I often will say with Tara that I won the lottery when I married her. So that's kind of what you're saying, right?
Exactly.
Okay, Hope.
Okay, so no, this is true. I think
smile.
the very first day that I met him, I went home and I told my mother, I said, I just met the nicest guy that I think I've ever met. And over 40 years later, I still say that about him. He is genuinely the nicest person that I have ever met in my life.
Thank you guys so much for being here. And what an honor.
Well, thank you for having us. It's been very enjoyable.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Behind Our Smiles is a Wow God production. Discover more at wowgod.com.